Welcome. In this session we would be talking about the vegetation and cropping patterns in India. In the previous class we have already talked about the physiography of India and the drainage patterns in India. Now, as we have discussed in the previous session, a proper classification to understand any of the concepts in geography of India is very important. So as we classified in the physiography and drainage, a similar classification we have done for vegetation in this session. So our classification would run into 7 major divisions, and each 7 division would have a subdivision. So we will be understanding that one by one. So the first topic that we would be covering under vegetation is moist tropical. Now, as you can see, broadly we have classified the vegetation into 3. It's tropical, temperate and alpine. So alpine, I can say it's dealing with the mountainous regions. Tropical is dealing with the tropical belt, and then you have the temperate kind of vegetation that deals with the temperate forest areas. Now we'll be understanding this one by one. So tropical, we have classified it into 3, is the moist tropical, the dry tropical and the mountain subtropical. So when we talk about the moist tropical, we have further subdivided into 4 categories. The first is the wet evergreen, semi-evergreens, moist deciduous, and you have littoral swamps. Now talking on to the first, that is the wet evergreens. These are found in the regions where there is ample of vegetation. It's mainly in the south of the Western Ghats. You have Andaman Nicobar Islands, Lakshadweep Islands. So all those would be the example of wet equatorial forest, and then you have the northeast India. All the vegetation under wet evergreen forest would have tall trees, and the canopy would be in the shape of a kind of open cauliflower. So it would be, I can say, a very dense canopy such that the sunlight cannot reach the bottom. So the floor of such region would lack sunlight in this area. So you have tall trees with open cauliflower like canopy, mainly found in the island groups of India, the northeast states and the south of Western Ghat. The common trees under wet evergreen would be jackfruit, betel nut, jamun. Then you have palm and mango. These are some of the common trees that you will find under wet evergreen. The next is semi-evergreen. Semi-evergreen, as the name suggests, it's mainly found, it's less denser than the wet evergreen forest found in the regions of Western Ghats and Eastern Himalayas. So you have Western Ghats and East Himalayas as the main area where you will find the semi-evergreen vegetation. It's again dense, but not as dense as compared to the wet evergreen forest. The next is moist deciduous. Deciduous are the leaves that shed, are the trees that shed their leaves in a particular season. So in a particular season, all the trees of that region would shed their leaves. Now this is an example of moist deciduous under moist tropical. So moist deciduous is found all across India except the western parts and the northwestern parts of the country. You have all the region across India with moist deciduous. These are mainly broadleaf trees that you will find in this region. You have firm and strong trunk for most of the trees here. And again, they shed their leaves in one season. Usually it's the dry season. And finally, common examples would be sal, teak, devdar. So these are common examples of moist deciduous trees. And then you have littoral and swampy vegetation. This is found in the regions of Ganga and Brahmaputra Delta. That's one area where you will find littoral and swamps commonly and abruptly. Then you have the regions of Andaman and Nicobar, where again you will find littoral swamps. Most of the plants here have the capability to breathe in water. The common vegetation here would be pine and mangroves. So Sundarban known for its mangrove vegetation and sundari trees. So that's the classic example of littoral and swamp forest. Along with bullet wood are some of the other species that would be seen. Now we have covered moist tropical. Let's move on to dry tropical. As we see moist deciduous vegetation here, under dry tropical there would be dry deciduous vegetation. Now this dry deciduous vegetation is found in whole of North India except the Northeast India, where you have the wet evergreen vegetation. So Northeast India, so this Northeast India would have the wet evergreen vegetation, and the remaining north belt would have the dry deciduous. Again, since it is deciduous, it would shed its leaves in one season, and that would be most probably the dry seasons. So all the trees here would shed their leaves in the dry season. You have kind of evergreen vegetation mixed with deciduous in some regions. Then next is the thorny vegetation. This thorny vegetation and dry deciduous, a major difference here is you have a canopy of height up to 25 meters in case of dry deciduous, while the same canopy in case of thorn is 10 meters. So you have thorny vegetation like cactus, acre, kher, kanju as some of the major vegetations in this region. Mainly found in the western parts of India. You have the western Rajasthan and some parts of central India. You have dry evergreen. These are found in Andhra Pradesh and Karnataka region. Andhra Pradesh and Karnataka area, you have the dry evergreen vegetation. You have the classic characteristics of this region is the vegetation usually have good fragrant flowers. So good fragrance, sandalwood could be one example here. So these are some examples that are found under dry evergreen forest. Now let's move on to the montane vegetation. So under montane vegetation we classify it as montane subtropical and montane temperate. So based on the altitude, you have the lower altitudes would have subtropical, and then you have the temperate forest. So let's talk about the montane subtropical first. You have broadleaf forest, broadleaf montane subtropical forest mainly found in Western Ghats. You have parts of Himalayan belt, Western Ghats, Eastern Himalayas, the Silent Valley region. The classic characteristic is the presence of shifting cultivation. In these vegetation, oak, elder are some of the species. Oak, elder are some of the species that are commonly found in the broadleaf mountain subtropical region. The next is pine. The vegetation is coniferous. So you have maple, you have pines, junipers as some of the common vegetation in this case. Then you have this vegetation is mostly found in central and western Himalayan region. So central and western Himalayan region you have pine vegetation with mostly coniferous vegetations. You have trees of the shape of conifer. So you have kind of Christmas tree, pine, junipers are some of the common examples. And lastly you have dry evergreen. These are found in the regions of hot dry season, hot dry summer and cold winter. You will have the mountain subtropical dry evergreen forest. The classic characteristic of mountain subtropical dry evergreen forest is its leaves are shiny. Common example is olives and pomegranate. So pomegranate and olives are some of the classic examples of dry evergreen vegetation. Then let's move on to montane temperate forest. So you have dry temperate forest, moist temperate forest and wet temperate forest. Let's start with the wet temperate forest found in the parts from east of Nepal till Arunachal Pradesh. You have the extent of wet temperate forest. In the south you have it in the hills of Nilgiri. Now if I talk about the arrangement from north to south, you have the northmost layer is conifers, the next layer is deciduous, and the least layer is rhododendrons. So these are the three layers of arrangement in the wet temperate forest. The next is moist temperate forest. Moist temperate forest is found from West Himalayas to East Himalayas. So the easternmost region you will have the wet temperate, then you will have the moist temperate, and then you will have the dry temperate. If I divide it across the longitudes, I can say it in this way. So you have the moist temperate forest, which is from West Himalayas to Eastern Himalayas, found in the region of heavy rainfall, abundant vegetation. You have ferns and bamboo as the main vegetation in this region. And finally, you have the dry temperate forest. Dry temperate forest is found in high altitudes. Juniper, fir, pine, deodar, chilgoza are some of the common examples of dry temperate, found in the northernmost regions of Lahul and Spiti, Kannur and parts of Sikkim. Lahul, Spiti and Leh Ladakh region. So the region beyond the Karakoram range, I could say, would be the region of dry mountain temperate forest areas. The basic characteristics we have already talked about. Now the next come is the subalpine and the alpine, found in the regions of very high altitudes. You have range from 2500 to around 3000 meters. You have subalpine. Now subalpine vegetation varies from east to west. The eastern vegetation has higher timberline, I could say, or the level till which you can see the vegetation as compared to western, because of the high humidity and heavy rainfall here. So higher humidity and rainfall in the east would lead to better timberline in the east. Common vegetations in the west would be juniper, willow and blackcurrant, while towards the east it would be red fir, black junipers and birch and larch would be the common vegetations here. Now alpine vegetation, you have moist and dry. So moist is usually found in the Indo-Myanmar border. It's kind of scrub vegetation, while the dry vegetation has an altitude of around 3000 to 4000 meters, and it's found with the trees like willow, honeysuckle, etc. Now this is the most common classification that we can do for understanding the vegetation in India, but there were numerous scholars who presented their own views to help understand the vegetation patterns in India. Of these, H.G. Champions was the leader, and in 1936 he propounded a classification with the following details. So the first is the tropical evergreen according to him, with a rainfall of around 150 centimeters and temperature of around 24 to 27 degrees Celsius. A slight variation in the temperature according to him would lead to semi-evergreen vegetation. Now the vegetation found in this region are similar to what we have explained. So the evergreen, you will have the similar vegetations as we have talked about. Again the floor would lack sunlight. According to him, the tropical moist region would have a rainfall of around 250 centimeters with a temperature of 25 to 27 degrees Celsius. Tropical thorny would have 100 to 200 centimeters of rain, while the temperature variation would be much less, usually found in the Sahadraris. Common vegetation would be thorn, cacti, kanju and kher. You have subtropical montane. This is found at with a rainfall of around 100 to 200 centimeters again in the heights of I could say 2000 to 3000 meters, and average rainfall would be 15 to 20 degrees Celsius in this region. The next is dry deciduous. Dry deciduous, you have The vegetation would be closed canopy. Again the rainfall would be around 150 centimeters in this case. The next is Himalayan moist, found at high altitude of around 1000 to 2500 meters. Next is Himalayan dry temperate. You have you can find this in the range of 2500 meters and above. Then you have mountain wet temperate that we have already talked about, alpine and subalpine at a further higher altitude of around 3000 meters. Towards the west you will have the desert vegetation, and towards the Sundarban delta and the regions where you have the tidal influence you will have the tidal vegetation. Tidal vegetation, it would be mainly mangroves. Then you will have palms and epiphytes that could be seen in the tidal vegetation. So this was a kind of different classification, a bit different from what we have studied previously, given by HC champions. Now the next is, this diagram shows the various vegetation patterns that we have discussed so far. So as you can see, you have spots of mangrove vegetations here, and this mangrove is found mainly in the tidal areas and the deltaic areas. You have most of the North India that's under the influence of dry deciduous. The northeast that you have the wet evergreen forest, and towards the north you have the subalpine and the alpine forest, except the northmost under the China occupied Kashmir, I could say, and the western parts of the Rajasthan or Thar desert region, you have the desert vegetation. The rest of all vegetation that we have covered have been explained in this diagram. Now the cropping patterns. Now cropping patterns varies from region to region. You have a specific requirement for each crop that has to be met. Now we will be quickly discussing some of the major crops. Bajra, as one of the most common crop, is abundantly found throughout the India, specifically in the western and the southern India. You can see most part of Rajasthan, Gujarat, Maharashtra, Karnataka and parts of Uttar Pradesh and Uttarakhand have been covered under Bajra production. Barley production is confined mainly to Ganga Brahmaputra delta region and parts of Godavari delta. So you have the barley production here. Now comes the jute, cotton and rubber production. Rubber production is confined to the regions or parts of Kerala. Jute production mainly confined to West Bengal and parts of Assam. This was a major issue of controversy because most of the jute production remained with Bangladesh and the mills remained with India during the Indo-Pakistan divide, and because of that jute industry suffered a lot. Now there has been a lot of things done to revive the jute industry. However, this is the major jute growing region in India. Cotton, as you can see, is found mainly in the regions of black soil. So you have the Deccan region and the Malwa plateau. So Malwa plateau of Madhya Pradesh and Deccan plateau, you have the major region where you can see black soil and cultivation of cotton. So you have Gujarat, Maharashtra, parts of Karnataka and Punjab, Haryana where you have cotton production. You have rice production across most of the India, since the southern western and the southern eastern is a coastal region. Most of the regions you can see here is under dominant influence of rice cultivation. Also along the Ganga Brahmaputra rivers you have rice production. However, rice production varies as you move towards the center. You have most of the rice production, or I could say highest rice production towards the coastal regions. As you know, the rice requires lot of water, so coastal regions are a good opportunity for rice production. Now you have the production of sugarcane. Now you have sugarcane production specifically in the north and south. You have Maharashtra, Karnataka and Uttar Pradesh, Punjab and Haryana as the major producers of sugarcane. Tobacco you would find here and there in patches. However, Punjab, Haryana, parts of Gujarat, Vadodara are major areas of tobacco production. Tea production mainly found in Assam and Darjeeling, north of West Bengal. Then you have coffee production and some tea production in the Kerala and Tamil Nadu regions. Finally, wheat production throughout the northern and central India. You have the maximum production of wheat with major states being UP, MP, Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh. Then you have parts of Maharashtra, Gujarat, Punjab and Haryana as a major source of wheat production. So in the next session we will be covering about the various kinds of soils in India and the climatic classification with respect to India as given by Copen and Thornway. So you can subscribe to our channel for any further updates. Have a good day ahead.